Hi, welcome to NCTV Interviews. I'm your host, Michael Marca, and today in the studio with me, I have a local author who's written a book called Survivor, about his father's experience in the Philippines during World War II, marching on what was infamously called the Bataan Death March. So welcome to the studio, Francisco Lovato. Thank you for coming into the studio today, Francisco.
Thank you, Michael. I'm really glad to be here.
So let's just get started, and let's show our audience what your book looks like so that they can see it in local stores. It's just been published. It's called Survivor. Excellent. And the subtitle, why don't you give us the subtitle, because it's very intriguing.
Well, it's an American soldier's heartfelt story of intense fighting, surrender, and survivor from Bataan to Nagasaki.
And the book chronicles your father's experience during World War II, being in the Philippines. Why don't you just give us the basic overview?
The story takes place, it's what my father related to me over a 10-year period from about 1998 to just recently. And it takes place in the Philippines from the day the war started to the day the atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, and 3 weeks thereafter. So the entire war, he was involved in the entire war every second, every minute of the day.
So this would be what we would call a primary source history of World War II, spoken through you from your father.
There's less than 200 of these men left. There was 12,000 Americans in the Philippines when the war started, or actually who started the Death March. And only 4,000 came home. And of those 4,000, there's less than 200 left, and he's one of them.
And your father is still alive with us today?
He's very much alive. We just celebrated his 87th birthday in Albuquerque on Halloween. And he's very happy to be alive. Every day is a blessing. After you read the book and you hear the story, you'll know that why every day to him is like a whole new gift of life.
Well, the story of survival takes place in many manifestations all throughout human history, but the story of war survivors is particularly poignant. We are blessed to have the wealth of people like your father to draw on to continue telling the story of World War II. I'm hoping that this book will help reveal some of the lesser-known facts about World War II, and we'll get to that later on in the conversation.
Very good.
But I do want to get the audience started by taking a look at a piece of video that was shot by you and a companion. And why don't you give us a little bit of intro to the video, and we'll watch a few minutes of it to get us started.
Well, my father, although he defended the Philippines for 3 months, he was part of a group of Americans who were trapped in the Philippines when the war started. And they were forced to surrender to the Imperial Japanese forces in a location called Bataan. When they were surrendered, my father said he never surrendered. He was surrendered by his officers. They had to give up their arms and march to a prison camp. And that prison camp was almost 75 miles away from the point where they surrendered. And they were forced to walk it in almost 100-degree weather and 100-degree humidity. It was in the high 90s. It was the hottest time of the year. And they had very little food, many had none, and hardly any water. Almost 1,500 of them died on that march alone or were killed. So in order to commemorate that walk, I felt within myself that one day I wanted to walk that same distance. I certainly didn't want to do it, with somebody beating on me and poking me with a bayonet, but I decided I wanted to walk it, and I thought that during that period of time I would really feel what it would be like to be walking. It gave me a lot of time for reflection.
Let's take a look at that video and get a sense of your journey.
Great.
May 9th, 2008, we're getting ready to start on our 60-mile walk to Sacramento, right here at Casey's Park. Penn Valley. It's about 7:20 in the morning, and we expect to arrive in Sacramento on Monday afternoon at the state capitol and Vietnam Memorial. So our first leg of the trip will get us to Camp Far West. And so let's go.
All right.
My father, like his father before him, served in the Army during the World Wars. My grandfather was a bugler. He knew over 300 bugle calls. Imperial Japanese forces attacked the Philippines only 10 hours after Pearl Harbor, where my dad narrowly escaped being shot by an airplane. Later he was assigned to a half-track battalion that fought the Japanese landing in the northern end of Lingayen Gulf. According to recently discovered information, this may have been the very first face-to-face battle between American forces and the Imperial Japanese in World War II. They valiantly defended the Philippines until Easter Sunday weekend in April 1942. Finally, they ran out of food, ammunition, and were completely overrun by a massive force of Japanese reinforcements. Over 75,000 American and Filipino soldiers were crammed into the tip of the Bataan Peninsula, where they were ordered to surrender by their commanders. Little did they know that in 3.5 years, only 1/3 of them would survive the ordeals before them. Although they were promised by the Japanese generals that they would be treated under the terms of the Geneva Convention, nothing was farther from the truth. Already hungry, nutritionally deprived, most men suffered from beriberi and malaria. They would have to endure a 75 to 80-mile march in blazing heat and over 90% humidity, with virtually no food and very little water. This later became known as the infamous Bataan Death March. By the end of the war, only 1/3 of the men who began the Death March came home.
Very intriguing piece of video there, blending two different threads. And I think I want to kind of back up and pick up on something in the video that seems very, very unique to the story of the Bataan Death March. And that is the experience of your father fending off the Japanese as they were landing in the Philippines for the very first time. Could you give us a little background on that?
Well, you know, when I was interviewing my father, he told that incident, and I went back to the history books, and I thought, well, that was a significant piece of history, and I realized that there was nothing about it. There was all the history, the U.S. history, including the archives, said that the Japanese landed unopposed. And my dad said they sunk 30 of their landing craft. That's hardly unopposed. So I went to the Japanese archives, read them, and said that they lost about 30 landing craft due to high waves. And so I thought, well, so when I went to the Philippines, I actually went there to that exact spot. There was a local villager who was there and witnessed that. His father had witnessed it and told him that story. So I'm trying right now with the U.S. World War II Museum to get that story into the archives, because that would have made it the very first face-to-face battle between the Imperial Japanese and the American forces in the Pacific War in World War II.
And your father is one of the remaining people alive?
He's the only one.
The only one that you know of?
I tried to find the Filipinos, but it was very difficult because they were an ad hoc unit put together the day the war started and sent up there to the north. In those days, there was no wireless communications. Everything had to be done through wire. And that story just got lost in the records.
Well, looking at the excerpts that are available online of the book and reading through them gave me a very vivid picture of this particular moment in history. Could you tell us a little bit about how your father defended the Philippines and what armaments he was manning?
Certainly. He was in a very unique piece of equipment. It was a half-track, and on it was mounted a 75 millimeter, which is about the size of a baseball, with a bullet about that big. That was used as an anti-tank weapon, predominantly. It was an artillery piece, one of the larger pieces. And he was always on the front. In other words, if he was here, there was a small zone, and then the Japanese were on the other side. So he was constantly, even during the retreat into Bataan, on the front of the line of battle. So he has a very first-hand experience of what it was like in battle. One night, they destroyed 4 tanks as the Japanese were trying to traverse a bridge, these bridges across many, many rivers in the Philippines. And so they fought valiantly, but they ran out of water, they ran out of gas, they ran out of food, they ran out of everything. And there was no way to get resupplied because Pearl Harbor had been destroyed. And so here they were on the other side of the world, not very far from Japan, in the Philippines, stranded. And that's why they became known as the battling bastards of Bataan. No mama, no papa, no Uncle Sam, and nobody gives a damn. That was a kind of a poem that they repeated. And MacArthur abandoned them on March 15th. He left to Australia because he knew it was going down. And so there they were left to be captured by the Japanese. And this book, the other 2/3 of the book, is about my father's experience in the Japanese prison camps, living in the prison camps, dying, seeing death all around him. He buried 100 people a day, approximately 100 people a day. And it was very difficult. He was only 18 years old. And many of the people he was burying were 17 and 18 and 19 years old. The older guys who were in their 20s, the real old guys, they had it harder even. His youth kind of helped a little bit. And also his faith in God and in his extreme desire to come home and be with his family and to live in peace again kept him alive.
It's quite an intriguing story and a real testament to your father's strength and to be such a young man and to be faced with such adult and superhuman tasks. Going back to the part of the story that is the march itself, how many men were on the march and how long did the march take?
The numbers aren't exact. It's hard anywhere you look. But the round numbers are there was about 75,000 total men on the march. That included the Filipinos, which was almost 75,000. There's about 12,000 Americans, and the remainder were Filipinos. And they were marched about 75 miles to a prison camp called Camp O'Donnell. There was a brief period in there that they didn't have to march. They were put into a railroad car, which was equally, maybe worse. They were stuffed in so tight that men died standing up, and they couldn't even fall down. It was so horrific. It was as bad as you can imagine humanity could have to, that a human being would have to experience in any time in their life. And there they arrived in the prison camp, and it didn't get better.
The march itself must have been a mark on your father's psyche. I can only imagine such a traumatic experience. Is that part of the reason why you tried to reenact it and relive it to kind of step in your father's shoes?
Exactly. You know, the old Indian saying, you know, don't judge a man until you walk in his moccasins. Well, I certainly didn't walk in the same moccasins, but I did approximate the same distance, and I wanted that time for me to have 4 days away from thinking about everything else in my life, my own challenges, and reflect on the challenges that he must have had during that time and the other men that were with him, the ones that made it and the ones that didn't. There's less than 200 of them left. And it definitely made a big difference in my life. The Death March, as you said, Michael, it left an indelible mark on his mind. But my father always thinks of the positive. He always looks at every day, no matter how difficult it is. I don't care. It's nothing compared to what he had to put up with in 1942 through 1944 in the prison camps. It got worse in the camps. It got worse on what was known as the hell ships. It got worse when he got to Japan and he had to become a slave. There's rules about being a prisoner of war, and they didn't follow those rules.
Before we get into the camps, let's take a look at a piece of video that you brought in from your march. It's a short piece that'll give us a little glimpse into your experience.
Great. Corner South Dowd and Moore. Going to go down Moore a couple of miles to Brewer. It's pretty hot. I could sure use a cold ice something right now. Well, I know one thing. Those men who had to do the Death March, including my father, I sure feel for them every step along this road. Makes me think of men who had to do the Death March.
We're coming back, Francisco. Powerful experience, obviously, and educational for us, the recipients of the valor and the sacrifice of men like your father. You began to describe his experience in the camps. I want to also kind of weave in a little bit of the story of writing the book, because I can tell that writing the book was, for you perhaps, a way to work through the pain of that experience with him. Can you describe a little bit about the camps and a little bit about your process in extracting those stories from your father?
Well, it was hard for him at first to talk about the more difficult moments, including the Death March, and those painful moments in the camp where he witnessed and experienced incredible pain and loss and suffering. But being a former therapist, I realized that I had to do this interview in a different fashion. I had to take it from another point of view. And I realized that he couldn't talk all about it. That's why it took 10 years to essentially bring all that story out, to get the detail of that story. And as I took it home, each time I would interview Dad, either on the telephone or in person, I would come home with the story on tape. I had it completely on videotape. And I would look into his eyes on the videotape to be able to, as he was talking, to really get the feeling of what was going on in those moments. And I could see him looking away in the distance as he was seeing that whole picture unfold. And that's what I tried to write. And yeah, it was painful for me. and still is.
It's evident, and it's understandable. Back to the book, reading some of the segments as I did online, and I think we have the name of the website that we can show the viewing audience. I believe it's survivorbook.com. I was intrigued specifically by the pictorial quality to the writing, the very cinematic approach you took to telling the story in a first-person narrative, in a moment-by-moment device that really brings the reader right in and actually gives the reader the experience of being in your father's shoes. I can imagine that that was a challenging road to travel for the 10 years it took you to extract these stories and to bring these stories to life. Can you tell us a little more about that process?
I think part of it was taking some breaks in between. Just having to step away from it for a while, and but for both of us. But the reward of taking the time was the story that you were able to read. I had to do it justice. A story like this can't, if I was going to write it and put it in print, it was going to be all there. And what those people had to go through, what they experienced, and what I wanted the reader to know. I had read just about every book on the subject, written by other POWs. Some of the drawings in the book were drawn by a POW, Professor Ben Steele, University of Montana, in the art department. He allowed me to use his drawings in the book. It was a wonderful experience to be able to do that, but I had to make sure that it was all there. Everything my dad saw, everything he witnessed, the feelings associated with those incidents. It's not all sad. It was humorous. It was, you want to stand up and cheer at moments when some horrible things were happening to him, but you knew that he was coming out the other end, even stronger. And the music music was an essential part of what got him through this.
Well, I'm interested in hearing more about the music. You told a brief anecdote about his harmonica. Maybe you can give us a little intro. We've got a bit of video of you and your father of late, but give us the lead into this.
He kept his harmonica. He hid it from the Japanese. He kept it away from them for 3 months. They didn't know he had it in the prison camps. And one night when he was so distraught, and all he could think about was his family back home, and beautiful New Mexico sunsets and crickets by the river, he knew that he had to stay alive to see that again. And the one song that his own mother and my grandmother and he loved the most was God Bless America. And that song meant the most to him at that moment in time. So he took out his harmonica in the middle of the night and went to farthest from the guard post in the middle of the night when everybody was dead to the world, because they were worked to the bone. And they had no place to sleep but on the ground on little mats in the beginning. And he took out his harmonica and started to play it as low as he could. God Bless America. And the man who woke up next to him said, "Oh, Frank, please, a little louder," and a little louder. And pretty soon it took off like a wave. Everyone started singing God Bless America in the middle of the night. Now, when I say everyone, I meant like close to 10,000 men stood up and sang. So, my dad knows a very unique brand of patriotism. It's not just a bumper sticker. When he stands up and he plays his harmonica, he plays it every day to this day. And as you'll see.
Yeah, let's take a look at the video and get a look at your dad.
Great.
Paloma, which actually is a dove that's flying and lands on your window pane, treat her kindly because it is my person.
So we have a little taste of your father and his harmonica playing and his spirit, which is obviously alive and well to this day. I want to mention the website one more time for people who are interested in taking a look at some excerpts from the book, survivorbook.com. The book is called Survivor, and it's written by Francisco Lobato. We're very lucky to have you here in the community, Francisco, and sharing your story and sharing your father's story. I really appreciate you coming on the show with us today, and I wish you luck. What's your next step with the book? It was just recently published.
I'm going on a tour.
Great.
And I've been touring bases in California, Southern California bases, and I'm going to be going up to Oregon, Washington, and the western states.
Okay, excellent. Very nice.
And another walk.
And another walk.
I've got a walk planned in San Antonio, Texas. And
Great. Well, thanks for coming on the show, and we'll see you next time on NCTV Interviews.
thank you, Michael.
Thank you.